Take me out to the crowd, buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back, 'cause it's root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame, 'cause it's 1, 2 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Thank you for joining with me. I'm not quite as good at that as Harry Carey, but I appreciate that you joined along. And I appreciate that you're here on opening weekend of baseball season, also Easter Sunday, and you all look so great. You're dressed so sharp and so nice, and I really wanted to dress the same way to be with you, but Coach insisted I wear this imitation of my team jersey. Now this is not my actual team jersey, because if I had worn that, I would have had to give you like a week's notice to bring some very powerful eclipse glasses, because it's so bright that looking at it for a whole 30 minutes or whatever would leave you with some vision damage. So Coach made this mock-up that's not quite as awesome as the other one and told me to wear it. He sent me here today because he wanted me to tell you my story. So I guess I will. So let me start with my name. My name's Bob, and my story has a lot to do with baseball. As a matter of fact, baseball was the very first thing I ever remembered. I remember waking up, and I didn't remember really being born, but the earliest memory I had was being at the ballpark, and that's where I grew up. Never left. Lived there in the stands, and from my earliest memories, I was watching the guys out on the field playing baseball, and guys started to teach me how to play the game as well. Even a little bitty kid up in the stands, and then sometimes they'd let me get out on the outer areas of the field, out of bounds there in the bullpen, and I was learning how to play the game of baseball. And then I got to start as a kid. I got to get into the game a little bit, just a part of an inning here and there. And then as I got older, I got to play more. And by the time I was a teenager, I was playing all the time. So that's kind of my childhood. Let me tell you a little bit about my team that I was playing for. I'll start with our manager. Our manager was a guy named Diablo. And we really liked the way he managed the game. A lot of managers, really stay on your case, give you a lot of rules and discipline and all that. Not Diablo. He was the most relaxed manager anybody could ever play for. His only rule was just do what comes naturally. He said that's the best way to play the game. So we didn't have grueling practices. We didn't have to do all this physical exercise and keep all this discipline and set of rules. We just went out there and just played naturally. And he didn't care what we did, either on the field or off the field, as long as we, played naturally when we were out there. So in between innings, he didn't care if we called over the beer man and got completely drunk before we got up to bat. He was fine with that. He didn't care if our money was a little short and we robbed one of the guys carrying concessions around. He was okay with that. He didn't care if we got into fights with each other, got into trouble in the stands, anything at all. Diablo was fine with it. And we enjoyed that. I mean, we kind of each were the captain of our own destiny, and we liked playing for him, except for the fact that his one downfall was that he really didn't seem to care about us. Every now and then, one of us would pull a hamstring, or heaven forbid, get hit in the head with a baseball, or get into trouble in a fight up in the stands. And whenever that happened, Diablo would just sit in the dugout and laugh his head off at us. Like he never sent anyone out to help us. He would point and laugh, and we didn't like that aspect because sometimes you were hurt and you needed some help and you weren't getting it from our manager. Our team was called the Sinners, and our jerseys were jet black, which would have been kind of nice looking, except they sort of had this magnetic ability to attract dirt. And so they were just perpetually filthy. I mean, our own sweat just absorbed into them. Dirt just clung to them. And they were very difficult to wash. So that was a little bit of a downside of playing for the Sinners, was our jerseys were always so dirty. But it sure beat playing for the other team. Our opponents in the baseball game, they were called the Saints, and their manager was the total opposite of ours. He was a guy named J.C., and he had all this discipline and all these rules. His guys were always practicing. He was insisting that they study the rule book, that they work on their skills, and then he had a code of conduct. Even when they had a break in between innings, they just couldn't, run amok through the stands. He would get on to them. If they got out of line, he would storm out of the dugout and chew them out to their face and exercise some discipline. And we Sinners looked over at that and said, man, that is not for us. I mean, that guy, he just runs too hard a ship for all of us. We don't want to be playing for him, riding on that boat, riding on that ship. We don't want any part of that. So we didn't like that, but I have to give him a little bit of credit, this JC guy, because whenever any of the Saints got injured or hurt, he would sprint from the dugout and be at their side even before their teammates were there. He would comfort them, help them bandage up their wounds, whether they were on the field or in the stands. Anytime they got into trouble, he was right there. And as much as he would get on to them at other times, when they were down, you could just tell by the look on his face. I mean, I saw tears in his eyes. He really seemed to care about his players. And not just them. I mean, even some of us on the center team, when we got hurt, every now and then he'd run out and take care of us too. So we did appreciate that about him. But we didn't like the rules. Their jerseys were the opposite of ours. They were white, and they said Saints across the front of them. And they seemed to repel dirt. Now, Saints would get dirty. They slid into base or fell down in the outfield and got grass stains on their jersey, but the jersey seemed to just come clean. It seemed like the dirt just kind of gradually disappeared and fell off. So that was their jerseys. But their jerseys might not have stunk, but they did. Now, not body odor. I mean, they were terrible baseball players. It's the craziest thing. We went out and played without any practice. They were always drilling, always practicing. And yet, every inning, we just beat the living daylights out of them. They were the biggest bunch of losers you'd ever find playing a baseball game. I mean, once in a while, they'd get a base hit. Very rarely, they'd score a run. I only remember a handful of home runs. And I think the whole time I was in the game, I remember one grand slam they hit. And so inning after inning after inning, they just sort of looked like a comedy of errors out there. And they had a lot of errors, and they just could not get their act together. So we were confident we were beating them soundly. 100% confident, even though there was one strange thing about the ballpark that we played in. There were these low-hanging clouds that hung right over the top of the stands. They touched the very top row of the stands. And we could see a faint light above those clouds. And we knew that above those clouds, on the top of the stands, was where the scoreboard was. But the clouds never cleared enough that we could get a good look at the scoreboard. It was constantly obscured. So this created a couple of problems. One was no one had any idea what inning we were in. I mean, we'd been playing for a very long time, as long as anyone remembered, played a lot of innings, but no one knew what number inning we were in or how many innings were behind us or in front of us in the ball game. The other problem was no one knew the score. I mean, we knew we were ahead, but we didn't know exactly by how much. And we tried to keep track as best we could, but nobody really knew the score. So that's kind of the way my early life was. And I guess things would have kept on like that, except for this one strange afternoon that started to send things on a different trajectory. The Saints actually were having a good day, which was pretty rare. And they gotten a couple of hits, and I had gotten a hit, and I had been advanced to second base, which was, I was playing second base. A couple of them had gotten hits, and one of them had been advanced to second base. I was playing second base, and I was sort of amazed. Because normally, when I played second base, I had nothing to do. No Saint ever got out that far, but one was there. And our coach, Diablo, was furious that we were letting these losers actually get some hits. So he decided to do a pitching change. So there we were. Everything's, in this long timeout. I'm standing there. There's a Saint. I'd never really been that close to one before because he never got on base. And I decided to do something I'd never done. I thought, I'm going to talk to this guy. So I introduced myself. I said, hey, I'm Bob. He said, well, I'm Chuck. Good to meet you, Chuck. I didn't really want to be rude, but I had a question I wanted to ask. And I've been wondering it for a long time. I said, Chuck, do you care if I ask you a question that sounds a little bit rude? He said, go ahead. I said, man, how does it feel to be a loser? I mean, how does it feel to play on a team day after day, week after week, month after month, where you all just lose all the time? And Chuck looked at me and chuckled. I guess maybe that's why he had that name. And he laughed and he said, well, actually, I used to play for your team. I used to be on the Sinners. I said, no way, you used to be on my team. He said, as a matter of fact, everyone on the Saints team used to play for the Sinners. Well, I was glad he said this because there was something I'd been wondering about. And that is, anytime someone showed up at the ballpark, they always showed up on our team. So I could never figure out where the Saints players came from. So I figured out when he said that, okay, so all the Saints are former sinners. I said, dude, why? Why in the world would you switch from this team to that one? I mean, all those rules and all that discipline, and then you lose all the time. And Chuck said, well, I switched because I want to be a winner. What? I said, no, you're a loser. Why did you switch from the winning team to the losing? He said, because I want to be a winner. I heard about Abbott and Costello and who's on first, and I was afraid I was getting pulled into something like that. And I just sat there kind of confused. I'm like, okay, look, you're messing with my head. What do you mean you switch teams because you want to be a winner? The Saints are terrible. We've beaten them every inning. He said, oh, but listen, this Saint told me that a long time ago, the Saints manager, J.C., actually stepped out onto the field. Oh, J.C.'s a managing player? I've never seen him out. Well, he stepped out onto the field, and he picked up a bat, and by the time he was done with that inning, the Saints had scored so many runs that the Sinners could never, ever catch up. Diablo was furious. He knew he'd been defeated, and that one inning, everything changed in the game. You said a Saint told you this. Yeah, a Saint told me about this. So you didn't see this happen yourself. Well, no, it was before my time. So what's the name of this player that told you this, that saw this happen? Well, he didn't see it happen either. An older Saint told him. Well, what was his name? And when he didn't see it either. It kind of goes back a whole lot of generations of players. So nobody ever actually saw this happen. This is all just some sort of rumor that's been passed around. He said, well, I thought that at first, but I actually went over to the Saints dugout and asked if I could see their team scorebook, and it was recorded in there. I found the inning, and I saw all the runs that JC scored. Not the official scorebook, right? The Saints scorebook. Yeah, that's the Saints scorebook. You can go look at it. I'm like, I don't want to look at their scorebook. I mean, of course they're going to alter it and make it a big fraud to make it look like they're ahead. This story sounds like a bunch of baloney. I can't believe you would switch teams over some vague rumor that JC scored all these runs in an inning long, long ago. Well, I'm telling you, not only did I believe it because of what I was told and what I saw, but once I got to know JC, I knew if anybody could do that, he could. And I knew he did. And I just had to sort of take it on faith and believe it. Well, you can have your faith if that's what you want, but I wouldn't switch teams on anything like that. So that's the whole reason that you switch teams, was this rumor. Well, there was one other thing. This saint told me that one day the ball game was going to end. Oh, come on, Chuck. Are you one of these crazy people? We see them every now and then. They storm out onto the field and they carry these placards around. The end of the game is near. This is the last inning. And they get everybody all riled up. And then after the inning ends, the next inning starts, the game goes on, and those people leave the field in shame. The game has been going on as long as any of us can remember. It'll probably keep going on forever. You really believe it's going to end? Yeah, I do. You see, this saint told me, and I believed it. He said that the game is going to end one of these days, and when it does, the ballpark is going to be burned to the ground. Chuck, the ballpark is all there is, or all there was, or all there ever will be. This is it. Have you ever been outside the ballpark? No one has. No one's been outside the ballpark. So you're telling me that somehow this ballpark is going to burn to the ground, and then where are we all going to go? What's going to happen to all of us players if there's no place for us to be? Well, when the stadium burns to the ground, this saint told me that there's going to be 2 buses, and the saints are going to be loaded up on this one bus that has a destination of Mount Zion, and the sinners are going to be loaded up on a bus that has a destination of Lake Sulphur. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. I've heard about those places. Parents would tell us players those stories when we were little kids to try to get us to behave. If you're really good, one day you'll get to ride a bus and go to Mount Zion. It's this beautiful, shining place, and everything there is wonderful, and everyone's happy. But if you're bad, you're going to be loaded up on a bus to Lake Sulphur. It's this big lake with sulfuric acid, and the whole place stinks, and it's hot, and the people there live in torment. These are kids' stories. You believe that baloney? Well, actually, I do. I do believe it, Bob. And the thing of it is, I'm concerned about you because I don't want somebody like you to go someday to Lake Sulphur. It's a horrible destination. Well, you know what? A couple things about your coach that I will give you credit for, Chuck. He is a compassionate guy. So, you know what? I mean, he even looks after us sinners at times. So I tell you what, let's just say all of this fantasy is true. That you all are way ahead, that the Saints have won the game, that one day the game is going to end, and that the stadium's going to burn down. All this is true, and that there's these 2 buses. I don't think when it comes down to it that your manager is going to force us sinners to board a bus and go to Lake Sulphur. There's no way. He's way too nice a guy for that. He's way too compassionate, and I'm not worried about it. Well, Bob, the problem is he would love to have you at Mount Zion, but he can't let you there because he can't stand the sight of your jersey. What's wrong with my jersey? He kind of recoiled a little bit from the odor from all my sweat and filth, and he said, but because it stinks, because it's filthy, because it's dirty and grimy, and if you guys were walking around in Mount Zion, the place would smell like this place. It'd smell like a locker room. Well, Granted, there are some people on my team that really stink, but I am not that dirty. I mean, there's other guys, and he said, no, Bob, even if your jersey wasn't dirty, it still has the name Sinners emblazoned across the front of it. And that shows our coach that you're loyal to Diablo, that you're on the team of his arch enemy who hates his guts. And it reminds him of everything you ever did against his cause and his team since time began. It's your jersey. You need a new jersey. Chuck, I'll grant, there are some people on my team that have done a lot against your manager. Their jerseys are filthy. And you know what? I could totally see them getting shipped off to Lake Sulphur. I wouldn't want them around me either for all of eternity. Definitely send them off. But look at me. I'm not that good a player for the Sinners. I hardly ever even get a hit. I'm not done that much against JC. I'm just a normal guy. My jersey's a little dirty, but it's not that bad. I think I'll be okay. If everything you say is true, I think I'll be okay. Well, Bob, would you do one thing for me? Just one thing, and I'll leave you alone. Now, what is it? Look over at our dugout and look at our manager, JC. He's leaning over the rail right now. Okay, I see him. Now, take a good look at his jersey. I never really paid that much attention before, but I looked at JC's jersey, and it was just sort of dazzling. I mean, it was white, but whiter than even the snows that sometimes fell in the ballpark. It was brilliant, white, like diamonds, silver, white, almost iridescent in color, just beautiful. And then he said, now take a look at your jersey. I looked at mine. For the first time, I really noticed how filthy my jersey was, how repugnant it was. Well, there was a crack of the bat, and Chuck ran on. And our conversation ended, but I couldn't get out of my head the stuff he talked about. And I just kept turning it over my head for the next several days, and then a few days later, it was actually a nighttime portion of the game. I was playing left field, and nothing was going on, of course. The Saints weren't getting anything done, but Coach Diablo wanted to change pitchers to give another guy a chance to pitch, and so there was this huge timeout, and I'm just out there in the outfield, and I'm thinking about all this stuff that Chuck told me, and I thought, I'm going to look over at JC one more time. I just want to see what the deal is there. And I looked over, and to my shock, he was staring at me. There's nobody else out here. Nobody in the stands, but he is staring like right at my eyes. I'm like, whoa. And then he started to do this. He started to motion for me to come. And my heart started to race because I thought I knew what he was doing. He is asking me to change teams like Chuck did. I don't want to do that. I like playing for the Sinners. I like playing with these people. These are my buddies. Man, we have played ball for our whole lives. I can't give up my friends and be a traitor and change teams and live under all that rules and discipline. I'm not going to do it. But I couldn't look away. He was just staring at me, and he just kept motioning. And this thought started to dawn in my head that if I were ever going to change teams, it was now. This was my chance. This was my one moment in time. And I couldn't look away. And I don't know what happened, but something sort of got a hold of me, I guess, because I started walking out of the outfield and into the infield, and I could hear my teammates saying, "Hey, Bob, what's up, dude? Where are you going? What's up?" But I just kept walking closer and closer until I finally got to the rail of the dugout where JC was, and he's still staring at me, and I just kind of dropped down on my knees in front of him, and then I thought, oh man, what is going to happen now? I mean, I assumed he was calling me in to switch teams, but that was probably wrong. More likely, he was calling me in to chew me out. I mean, for some of the dirtiness of my jersey and the things I've done, I mean, why would he want me on his team anyway? And so I was just sort of kneeling there in terror and embarrassment and confusion, and I didn't know what to do. And then I did something even more crazy. I ripped off my filthy jersey and I gave it to him. And I said, sir, I'm sorry for all the things I've done against your team and against the cause of the saints. And I would like to be on your team, but I don't have anything to give you but this jersey. It's the most valuable thing I've got. And I gave it to you. And then I thought, what am I doing? He doesn't want this. And he looked at it. And into my forever shock, ever since, he actually reached out and touched that grimy thing, and he held it, and then he just tossed it behind him. And then he reached down on a shelf below him, and he pulled out a Saints jersey. And not a replica like I'm wearing today, the real one. I mean, it was as dazzling white and bright as his. It looked just like his. And to my shock, it had my name on the back of it. And he held it up there, and all I could think is, wonder what that costs. I mean, that is a really, really nice jersey. You can't buy that at Dick's Sporting Goods. I mean, this is beyond anything I can afford. And I was trying to think, I can't buy this jersey. I can't pay for this. It's like he read my mind. And he looked at me and he said, Bob, there's nothing you could give me that would pay for this jersey. It's so expensive, it cost me everything I have. It cost me my life. But if you will just trust me to be your manager and just reach out and take it, it's yours. I started to reach out and take it, and then I stopped. I thought, no, this is too good to be true. Nothing is free. I learned that from Diablo. You got to pay for everything. But I kept thinking of his words. Just trust me. Just trust me. And the next thing I knew, I reached out, I grabbed this jersey from him, and I threw it on, and I looked down, I couldn't believe the way I looked. I mean, I was like clothed in this brilliant white. I'd never smelled or felt this way before in my entire life. I felt clean. And across the front, instead of sinner, was written saints. And then I became conscious of this cheer coming up from all the Saints players. They were all cheering. And then, right on the heels of that, all this jeering and booing and catcalls of traitor coming from my former team. But to my surprise, I really didn't care. I stood up and I thought, I am a saint. And I am so glad I am. And there was this joy. And I looked at my manager, and I loved that guy. Matter of fact, it became my desire to tell all my former players what an awesome manager he is, and to try to get some of them to join my team as well. As a matter of fact, that was the passion of every one of us that played for the Saints. We wanted our former buddies to meet our manager because he was just so awesome. And I wanted to tell him about the inning where he won the game and all these things. And so I did. I started doing that. So did my buddies. And we saw quite a few people switch teams. But there were 3 who didn't. I want to tell you about them because each of them was just kind of an interesting story. One was a guy named Rick. So one day I was out there. I was playing. I actually got a hit that day, and I got to second base, and Rick was playing second base. And again, there was a pitching change, and I thought, this is just like the day I met Chuck. this is like the day that I first heard about this. So I started talking to Rick, and I started telling him all the stuff Chuck told me about how you need a new jersey, and your jersey's so dirty, and about Mount Zion and Lake Sulphur and all this stuff. And Rick looked at me, and he just had this big smile on his face. And then he pulled out of his back pocket this great big white thing, which I discovered was some kind of special soap. And it was like that stuff that you can clean stuff off the walls with. It was this new invention. And he pulled out this big bar of some kind of soap or magic eraser or whatever, and he started scrubbing his jersey. And the harder he scrubbed and the longer he scrubbed, I was really amazed at this product, because his jersey, it started to smell better, and it started to get cleaner. And even more amazingly, the black started to fade to kind of a gray and almost to a dull white. And he said, man, I don't need a new jersey. I am perfectly fine. I can clean my own jersey up without changing teams. I've got this down. And I had to at first admit that he was right, until I noticed that no matter how hard he scrubbed, the name Sinner was still emblazoned across his chest, his team name. It couldn't be changed. And he scrubbed and scrubbed. And I said, no, it's not enough to clean your jersey. It's the name of your team. But he just laughed at me and he said, I think I'll be all right. And then there was a hit, and I ran on. And so that was really the last time I ever talked to Rick. There was this girl named Sue. A lot of us on the team were trying to get Sue to look at our manager, because we just knew that if Sue would just look at JC, that she would join our team. We just felt it in our bones. So we were always telling Sue, hey, look over there, look at the dugout. But I tell you what, her team was on their game when it came to this, because every time Sue started to turn to look at the dugout, one of her teammates would run up with something to distract her. I mean, it could be anything. Big wad of money, some nice fancy jewelry, run up with some food or some alcohol or a ticket to something fun to do in the stands, or anything at all. It was just constant. And then when they weren't in on the game, sometimes even Coach Diablo would run out and wave something at her. And Sue spent her whole time in the game just distracted. She was looking at all these cool things that you could get in the stadium that her teammates and her coach were offering her, and she never did stop long enough to look at the dugout at JC. But the saddest guy, one whose story just gets me, was a guy named Tim. Because I talked to Tim, I told him all this stuff, and Tim looked at me and he said, you know what, Bob? You're right. I believe it. Totally believe everything you say. I believe JC scored all those runs. I believe he's the better manager. I believe the stadium is going to burn down. I believe in Mount Zion and Lake Sulphur. And I believe that I need to join the Saints. I was like, dude, all right, let's go. But not this inning. I mean, not this inning, but I'm going to. And I could tell he was sincere, but there was one thing that made me nervous about this, because you see, I had noticed when I was in the game that you could switch teams as long as you were in the game. But once you were pulled from the game, nobody could switch. And people were pulled from the game all the time, both by our coach, JC, and by Diablo. You never knew when you'd get pulled. I saw some people that didn't even play a third of an inning, and they got yanked from the game. And there were other people who had been in for way more innings than I had, and they showed no sign of stopping. On and on and on they played. But very seldom did you have any inkling you were going to get pulled. And I said this to Tim. I'm like, man, but you don't know. And Tim said, hey, I've just been in a few innings. And look at me. I'm a great player. I'm in great health. I'm sure I've got lots more innings that I'll be able to play. And I never will get out of my head what I saw that afternoon one day when Coach Diablo just stepped out of the dugout and he pointed at Tim and removed him from the game. because Tim spun from Diablo and he looked at me. And there was this look in his eyes as he turned and with slumped shoulders headed to the dugout. And I never saw him again after that. I've told you about some of the Sinners players. I want to tell you about one of the players for the Saints, because this guy was just plain weird. He was strange. His name was Abe, which is a little unusual name for a kind of an old-fashioned name. But what made Abe so weird is that, all of us got breaks in between innings. We could go up into the stands and kind of had our own little place fixed up there to kind of chill out. But Abe was obsessed with his place in the stands. I mean, he had a Lazy Boy recliner up there, flat screen TV. He had like chefs bringing him all kinds of exotic food that you couldn't normally get in the stadium. He had this pot of gold on one side and this pot of silver on the other, and he was continually trying to fill those things up. And he had sheets that were this fine silk from China and all these things, and he was just in luxury up there. And he would never get out on the field and play the game. Now, he was a Saint. It was on his jersey. As a matter of fact, he was a first baseman. And he really, the rare occasions that he played, he was the best first baseman that any of us ever saw. So we were saying, come on, man, get out here. We need your help. No, I'm good. Even Coach JC couldn't get him out on the field. He'd say, come on, get down here. Help us. But Abe would just sit up there and sip a Coca-Cola and watch the game, but never get involved. Well, one day, we were playing baseball. It was an inning just like any other. Nothing different at all. We were all sort of just trudging through the motions. And all of a sudden, our manager, JC, he got up out of the dugout. And he walked right to the middle of the infield. And he said, "Time out! All the Saints, come with me." Well, that had never happened before. We looked around, all the sinners were like, and all of us were like, what? And we didn't know what else to do. We just followed Coach, and he led us to the dugout and into the dugout. And then he unlocked the door behind the dugout that none of us had ever been through. It led to the clubhouse, back underneath the stands. And we walked into the clubhouse for the very first time. Now, the clubhouse was pretty fascinating. It was pretty amazing. But the thing that I was fascinated with was not the clubhouse itself. It was all the players who were in there. I saw what happened to all the people who got pulled from the game. I saw some Saint players that I remembered when I was a little kid, and they were there. And then I saw some that I'd heard about, and then some I had read about in a scorebook. And they were all there. They stretched all the way to the very back of the clubhouse, and they were all sitting on benches. Well, I was the last one to enter, so I ended up sitting on the very front bench. And once we were all in, Coach closed the door, and then he called for me to come up front. I'm still confused. I don't know what's going on. So I come up to the front, and Coach pulls out our team scorebook, and he opens it up. And he starts reading, inning by inning, all the stats that I had compiled while I was in the game. Now, thankfully, all my stats that I had acquired while I was a sinner, those were all deleted. And even the errors that I had made playing for the Saints, those were deleted as well. It was just the positive stuff, my hits and my runs and RBIs, defensive plays. And he would read these, and then as he got all the way done, he summed it up. He told me my total number of innings and the total number of positive plays I'd made for his team. And, there wasn't any criticism in what he said. He was just reporting the facts. But I kind of remember standing there thinking, man, I played that many innings and that's all I did? And I thought about lots of times I was just sort of goofing off in the outfield or messing around and really wasn't playing with my mind on the game. And I thought, oh man, I wished I'd done more. But he just stepped aside, and then behind him there was this table full of all these trophies, these medals, these like crown things that go on your head, and all these prizes. And he started loading up a bunch of them, and he gave them to me. He said, "Here is what your reward is. Good job, good player." And I really had mixed emotions, because at one part of me I was like, cool. But then I was looking over at a lot of the other ones on the table. I thought, man, I could have got that. I could have earned more, and he just called me good player, and that feels good, but man, I could have been so much better if I just had different priorities. I had my mind on the game. So I went and I sat down at my seat, and then he called up the next person and the next, all the way to the very back of the room. And some people got a lot more awards than me, and you think I would have been jealous of them, but I was proud of them. Kind of like I would have been of a kid of mine or a relative that I saw be real accomplished. Your child gets an award, you're not jealous, you're proud of them. And there was this love in this family thing, but most of the people I sensed had the same feeling as me. They wish they'd played a little harder and done more for Coach while they were in the game. Well, finally, we all sat down, and that was over with. But then two people stood up. It was a girl and a guy. And they happened to be the two that had more awards, trophies, and medals than anyone else. And they walked to the front of the clubhouse, and they dropped down on their faces before our coach, and they said, "Coach, you gave us all these awards, but none of this would have been possible if you hadn't paid for our jersey. You're the one that taught us how to play. You're the one that invited us to the team. You're the one that got rid of the dirty jerseys we used to wear and brought us in. You're the real champion. And we want to give all these trophies and prizes and awards to you." And they just threw them at his feet. And then one by one, not because we felt compelled by peer pressure, but because something welled up in us of gratitude and thanks. And we all wanted to do the same. And I remember going forward and just out of gratitude and love thinking, I'm so glad I've got awards to give you. And I put my face to the ground and threw those to him. My only regret was that I didn't have more to give to him. Well, when this was done, Coach said, "Okay, everybody gather up your stuff, put it back in your lockers. Let's go out on the field." Now, we had taken a couple glances because there was this flat screen TV. We could see what was going on the field. The Sinners were literally destroying the place. It looked horrible. As a matter of fact, Abe, the guy that had this wonderful place in the stands, every now and then I could hear him crying because you could see the Sinners just dismantling everything that he had built, and all things he'd stored up there were destroyed. And then he cried some more when he went up for the medal ceremony because he got some medals, but his focus had been on the stands. He thought, if only I'd been in the game. Well, we saw a little bit of that, but boy, when we actually walked through the doors onto the field, it was a wreck. But the Sinners were happy to see us show up. They had this grin on their faces, and then we saw why. They had two players, a pitcher and a catcher, and they were ready to go, and we could tell these guys were the greatest specimens of athletic ability we had ever seen. And every one of us thought, oh man, I don't want to face these two. I'm going to strike out for sure. And we were all starting to get nervous about this, and then Coach said, "Wait a minute, boys, I got this." He walked up to home plate, and to our surprise, he didn't pick up a bat this time like he had long ago. He just stood there at home plate, and before the pitcher could throw a pitch, he said one word. He looked at the pitcher, he looked at the catcher, he looked at Diablo, he looked at the players, and he said, "Scoreboard." There was this rumble that started. And then we all looked up, and the clouds that had covered the top of the ballpark for our whole lives started to lift. And as they started to lift, we could finally see the scoreboard. It encircled the entire stadium. And as the clouds lifted, the first thing we could see was the Sinners score. And as we had expected, they had scored a whole lot of runs. But as the clouds lifted further, we understood why the scoreboard had to be so huge and why it had to encircle the whole stadium. Because the number of runs scored by the Saints were infinite. And I noticed that they had all been scored in one inning a long time ago when Coach J.C. picked up a bat and took the field. When we saw this, everybody dropped to their knees. The saints, the sinners, Diablo, everybody. We just fell to our knees, and manager JC said, "The game is over, and the saints have won." And he looked at all the sinners and he said, "Now get off of my field." And they fled. I mean, they ran to their dugout and into their clubhouse, and we had a celebration. We carried Coach around on our shoulders, and we cheered and we celebrated, and we had this party that went on and on and on. But finally, Coach said, "We've got one more thing to do." And he went to the dugout of the sinners and he said, "Come forth." And they came. All the sinners started pouring out. Not just the ones who had been on the field at the end of the game, but all of them. Ones we'd heard about, read about, didn't even know. All the way since the game began, they all came out. And then together, Coach led all of us outside of the ballpark. We went through this tunnel that we had never seen before, and we came out on the outside of the ballpark, and we came into this huge parking lot. And then we heard this horrible noise behind us, and we turned around, and the ballpark was imploding. The stadium was collapsing in this great noise, and this fervent heat. It just melted into slag and then dissolved into smoke, and the ballpark was gone. And when we turned back around from that, us saints saw that we were all standing behind Coach, and he was sitting on a chair with a couple assistants around him, and he pulled out the official scorebook from the ballpark. And one by one, he summoned each sinner before him, and he went through their statistics, inning by inning, everything they had done against him and his cause. And when he was done with each one, he would hand them an envelope with an address on it. And the addresses were different from each other, but the last line was always the same, Lake Sulphur. And then he had his assistants escort them to one of the buses that we saw was in the lot. Now, most of the sinners went through this and didn't even say a word. They just stood there speechless. But there were a few that said, "Whoa, wait a minute, man. I am on your team. I know my jersey says Sinners, but there's been a mix-up." And you know what? Coach never blasted him about that. He would just call one of his assistant coaches. The assistant manager would come up. He had the roster of everybody that had been on our team. He would always check for their name, but there never was a mistake. It was always right, and that person would be escorted to the bus for Lake Sulphur. Now, I could tell that Coach didn't enjoy doing this at all, and we didn't enjoy it either. As a matter of fact, by the time the last sinner boarded the bus, we were all sobbing because we saw people that we knew and loved and cared about. And we saw the looks on their faces as they boarded this bus. But as the last one boarded, Coach turned around and he walked from row to row. And with a touch of his hand, he would wipe our tears from our eyes. And as he did that, somehow, it became okay. Somehow, we had peace. And somehow, that memory of that awful event faded. Well, we were loaded on the bus for Mount Zion. It was just a short trip to get there. But when we got there, it was more beautiful than anything I can describe to you, so I won't even try. And I noticed one strange thing, though. The longer we were there, the less and less I could remember the ballpark. The less and less I could remember the game. It almost did not even come to mind anymore. But one day, before it completely faded, I thought, I've got to see Coach. I've got to ask him a question. So I went and I found him and I said, "Coach, today the ballpark seems so insignificant. And the game seems so long ago and so silly. Why in the world did you build the ballpark? Why did you have us play the game?" And Coach said, "You know, Bob, there are a lot of people who claim they knew why the ballpark was there and claim they knew what the game was all about. But there is only one reason I built the ballpark. And only one reason we played the game. So that sinners could be transformed into saints." Now, of course, that's all a parable, a story. I don't think you have to be a brilliant person to figure out what the things in it represent. Maybe you're here this day and you're a Christian like Abe. You're a saint, but you are not in the game. You're sitting up in the stands. Your priorities are all in all the wrong places. You're living for a world that's going to be destroyed. And you're missing out on an eternal weight of glory. And maybe God is saying to you, it's time to get in the game. It's time to get all in. It's time to take the field. It's time to do your best for your coach. But maybe you're here today and you're still playing for the Sinners. And you've tried to clean up your jersey, but it still says Sinners. You've been distracted by the things of the world, or maybe you even intend to switch, but just not this inning. But maybe this morning, you can sense Jesus Christ looking right at you. Your heart is racing. You can feel him calling you to just come, dirty jersey and all, and give him your sin, give him yourself, and take the free gift of righteousness that he bought for you in that inning long ago when he picked up a bat of wood, or should I say, a wooden cross. Scored all the runs you'd ever need to be a victor, and then walked out of the tomb on Easter Sunday as the champion. He did it for you. And maybe today is your one moment in time to choose.